I thank the chairman. I would just ask Chairman McCall if in your recollection, when President Trump was president, were we involved in more war or less war? I would ask whether or not the horrific attack on Israel by Hamas occurred under President Trump's watch or under President Biden's watch.
I would say there were no wars in the prior administration. And I would also say, with respect to Ukraine, it was President Trump that delivered a $300 million lethal aid package for Ukraine that I signed off on. The first president to ever do so. Whereas the prior administration was giving them blankets, but not weapons. We had deterrence, I think.
Would the chairman agree that
at that time
that Ukraine was invaded by Russia under President Biden's watch, not President Trump's watch? That the Abraham Accords were carried out under President Trump's watch, not President Biden's watch? As I just noted, Hamas went into Israel conducting indescribable, horrific events on the people of Israel under President Biden's watch, not President Trump's watch. Is it not true that Nord Stream 2 set the stage for Russia going into Ukraine under President Biden's watch, not President Trump's watch? Is it not true that we abandoned Afghanistan, leaving Bagram, leaving Americans behind under President Biden's watch, not President Trump's watch? Are these not all true statements?
those are all absolutely correct, and it's not by coincidence. It's by design, because when our adversaries see weakness, you invite aggression, and that's, sir, is what we have right now.
Before I go on, I think that I would like to yield a minute or as much time as he needs to the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
I'd like to thank my friend from Texas. Yeah, just a few points in rebuttal. So as my friend from Texas was saying, if you look at the timeline, it tells you everything you need to know. The world is now on fire. It was under control in the last administration. But if you look at it, Nord Stream 2 is the best example. Somebody said that President Trump was aiding Russia. President Trump was shutting down Nord Stream 2. It was the Biden administration that greenlit Nord Stream 2. And again, I hate to reiterate this, but they did it at the same point where they shut down the Keystone XL pipeline for us. So when we can't export our own LNG, Russian gas is more expensive, by the way, which is much dirtier, the dirtiest gas there is. And at the same time, the Biden administration to this day is still fighting us on LNG exports. They're not allowing any permits for LNG exports, which again, weakens our power on the international stage and strengthens who? Russia and Iran. There was some talk about allies across the world not trusting this administration. Why don't you go and ask Niger what they think about the Biden administration giving up a $100 million drone base, and who took it? Russia. Right. I mean, it's completely laughable to think that this administration is hard on Russia. No, the Russians took it in Niger. It's a $100 million drone base that we just basically gave to the Russians. Let's talk about Ukraine. They were just talking about statements and everything. You know, if you look, leading up to the war in Ukraine, it was Trump that was providing lethal aid to Ukraine. Then Biden comes in, and Biden starts to make all these ridiculous statements that we would, quote unquote, tolerate a minor incursion into Ukraine. Like we would be okay if the Russians took a slice of Ukraine. He should have continued to give lethal aid to the Ukrainians to prevent the war from taking place. Instead, Biden was busy, I guess, sending them blankets and well wishes instead of the Javelin missiles they needed. There was a comment about Trump not trusting the intel community. Is this the same intel community that told us that Kabul would stand for years and Kiev would fall within days? I mean, maybe he was right not to trust what the IC said, because they've been right so many times before. The question, there was a comment about a prisoner being released from a theater internment facility in Afghanistan. That prisoner was released. He was released under President Biden right before with the withdrawal. So Biden gave up the Bagram Air Base, released the theater internment facilities, which of course houses terrorists. And then one of those terrorists, of course, blew up Abbey Gate, killing 13 U.S. service members, directly attributable to Joe Biden. The Abraham Accords. Abraham Accords, great thing. But the Abraham Accords came about because the Obama administration was so bad with foreign policy that them pushing this ludicrous idea of having an Iranian nuclear deal, it actually drove the Arab states to the Israelis against the Persians. And it was President Trump who then capitalized on that and was able to work out the Abraham Accords between many of the Arab states and the Israelis. It was heading in a very good direction, which led to the attack of September 7th, because Hamas, Iran, and other nefarious actors saw the Saudis and the Israelis and the other Gulf states getting close, and they needed something to drive a wedge. And of course, they knew they could get away with an attack with, again, a weak Biden administration. And let's talk about the Houthis. Delisting the Houthis from the terrorist watch list is an absolute sin. And somebody said something, our allies respect Joe Biden. How would you like to be one of our allies in Saudi Arabia? And so it's okay when the Houthis are attacking them. They're not terrorists when they're attacking the Saudis. But the second they start attacking Americans, then they're terrorists. They were terrorists from the beginning to the end. It just shows where our priorities are and how we won't defend our allies. So what's been said, and there was also some comment about the American people. If you pull up any polling data on this, right, you could do a poll tomorrow. The vast majority of Americans trust President Trump over Joe Biden on foreign affairs. Irrefutable. I'll try to pull it up if another gentleman would yield me more time. But with that, I yield back, and I thank my friend from Texas.
Thank my friend from Pennsylvania. I would ask my friend from Texas, Chairman, we've glossed over the impetus behind this, and I recognize that I think everyone in this room would acknowledge the horrific events of October 7th. But, you know, there was, for example, a Time magazine article, the worst 45-minute film you will ever see, which is referencing the film that I think many in this room have seen or at least seen parts of. In the way they describe it, the appalling record of Hamas brutality has set a new standard in graphic evidence of unrivaled human atrocities. In the aftermath of October 7th, brutal massacre of 1,400 innocent Israeli civilians, including mass rapes, tortures, bonding and immolation of toddlers, beheadings, and live mutilation. The Israeli leadership wrestled with how to show the world these horrors without desecrating the memory and dignity of these victims, while also attentive to the privacy and suffering of the victims' families. Massive, horrifying video and photographic imagery of the grotesque scenes was available through the sickening scenes which greeted Israeli rescuers who found new victims alive. But even more footage was provided by the gleeful terrorists themselves from their own body cameras, dash cams, and the devices of victims as they were slaughtered. That's what happened. That's what happened. And when that sort of thing, when America's been attacked and when that sort of thing has happened, and when FDR sat in this very building, in the chamber in which we serve, and he described the day of infamy, and he went through and describing what had occurred when we were attacked by Japan, and then set out to say that we weren't to declare war, that we were in a state of war. And when he described all that, what he did not do was outline what the proper casualty ratio is. He said that we would win. And if I'm the Prime Minister of Israel, my goal is to win. Nothing more, nothing less. It is to win. It is to defeat the enemy that wants to eradicate my people and my country. Would we call on any leader of any sovereign nation to take a different approach when attacked brutally, and not just in a single event, not just some single moment? I would ask the chairman how aware he is, which I'm sure is quite aware, of the extent to which the population, by any objective poll, by international organizations and media, of the people in Gaza, of what their perspective is on the appropriateness of the attacks by Hamas on Israel. Can the gentleman speak to that?
Well, there's massive celebration in the streets. Mr. Meeks and I visited the Prime Minister right after October 7th. And first thing he did is he showed the video of the Hamas attacks. And he's a very strong man. I've never seen tears in his eyes. Those are his own people. And he said, I want you to show this to Congress so they know what they did to my people, and I want them to remember it. And so we did. And we showed the video. Now I was in Kfar Aza, the kibbutz on the border with Gaza. And to know that entire community was wiped out, and the daycare center, the children were burnt alive, and the grotesque manner with which they carried themselves out, Israel does not target innocent civilians, Hamas does. Israel did not start this conflict, Hamas did. And Israel has the right to finish it. And the thing I find most egregious with this administration is that they're tying the hands of our greatest ally in the Middle East, and they're not allowing them to finish the job by Joe Biden saying, if you go into Rafah, I will cut off all weapons. What does that mean? And what kind of message is that sending to the rest of the world? I will cut off your weapons if you go into Rafah, which is the only way, sir, we can finish, that Israel can finish this conflict. You compare it to 9/11, they experienced what is 20 times 9/11 on October 7th. And they're going to do this with or without us. But I say we stand with our ally and not abandon her at this critical point in time. And that's what I'm worried that this administration is doing.
I agree with the chairman, and I would note that there is a significant amount of polling. Here's one poll being conducted by the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research, which is funded by European Union and the United States-based Ford Foundation, which says that 71% of Palestinians in both the Gaza Strip and the West Bank believe Hamas made the right decision in attacking Israel. This is from March. There's additional polling that would suggest, for example, that 91% of Palestinians, according to the survey, do not think Hamas has committed war crimes. And 93% say the terrorist organization did not commit the well-documented acts of rape and civilian slaughter that took place on October 7th. My point being is it not also true that there is a significant, lack of clarity with respect to Hamas and the members of who might make up, for example, the battalions that the gentleman described, and the civilian population, and where those lines bleed? Is that not an accurate reflection of the difficulty with which Israel is faced with dealing with taking out the enemy combatants?
Absolutely. But the fact that they use their own people as human shields in hospitals, they take the hostages. This is why it's so difficult for Israel to go in. They want to protect innocent civilians, but it's Hamas that puts their own civilians at risk. It's Hamas that's blocking the checkpoints to block humanitarian assistance from coming in. They just killed 3 Israeli soldiers trying to bring humanitarian assistance into Gaza, and Egypt now is blocking the Rafah. Look, this is going down a very dangerous path in my view. If the optics are that we're now in defense of Hamas over Israel, and that's what, unfortunately, the optics are looking that way with this decision by the administration. Now, I understand, I know my friend is well-intended here, but in that part of the world, they understand power and strength. This looks like a weak moment to me, and it sends a really dangerous message to our adversaries.
Has it not been a dominant theory of the way we carry out our engagement in war to go in and just level the enemy, right? Was that not essentially the way we carried out our operations, for example, in Iraq in 2003 or Desert Storm?
Israel is the only country I know that gives leaflets to evacuate.
Right.
Did Hamas give that opportunity to the Israelis? I don't think so. But they are giving 4 weeks to have innocent civilians evacuate. No other nation at war has done something like that. And I would say that, again, the ratio here is far better than our attempts in Mosul. That was 5-2. Here it's 2-1. West Point Academy says in urban warfare, the ratio is typically 9-1.
9-1, right.
That's
and
West Point
the United
Academy.
Nations has that data as well.
And the United Nations, and I would say that Israel is exercising great caution to protect innocent lives.
Would it surprise the chairman to know that there's sources that show that Israel has made over 70,000 direct phone calls, sent over 13 million text messages, left over 15 million pre-recorded voicemails to notify civilians that they should leave combat areas, that they've given, in many cases, weeks of warning for civilians to evacuate the major urban areas of northern Gaza before it launched its ground campaign in the fall, that they dropped over 7 million flyers and deployed technologies wherever they could to try to ensure that people had ample room to get out from the attacks when they're trying to target the areas where Hamas had purposely embedded within the civilian populations while they would carry out their attacks on Israel from those positions?
That is all correct. And they're doing the same thing in Rafah right now. to allow the opportunity for evacuation. No other nation on earth has ever gone to this extent to protect innocent civilians.
We've covered this. We've covered the ratios. I think that all of the evidence that I've looked at certainly points to the fact that Israel, frankly, may be studied for a long time in our military academies and in how one carries out warfare, particularly urban warfare in the modern context, on how to conduct such an operation in a way to get the result that you want, to destroy the enemy while trying to minimize civilian deaths. Would the chairman agree?
We've never had a humanitarian zone set up in the middle of a war zone. So Israel, you're correct in this analysis. And for us to tie one hand behind their backs right now is the worst thing we can do.
Yeah, and like I'll close with this by saying, look, I was fairly public in my opposition to our overall omnibus spending package for a variety of reasons that don't really address this specific issue. I opposed the foreign aid package for a variety of reasons involving both our lack of border security, my concerns in advancing with Ukraine without as clear of a mission as I think we should have, but in significant part with respect to the piece involving Israel, because of my concern that the $9 billion would be used in ways that would actually be counter to Israel, and my concerns in talking to people in Israel that it could be used that way. I understand my colleagues that reach a different conclusion on the balance of the interest. But my point of bringing that up is just to say, look, here we are. We have funded our regular, $4 billion-ish of MOU in the regular appropriations package. And we've got now was this 14 billion or 17 billion that was in the supplemental, 16 point something billion in the supplemental for Israel. And the administration, Congress having literally just acted to do this, and the administration is going to say, this administration knows best, when in fact it was this administration this isn't the first time, right? They recently abstained from the United Nations Gaza ceasefire resolution, correct?
Correct.
The Biden administration tried to restart the failed Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA, which would further legitimize and empower Iran, while we're currently removing the sanctions that are empowering Iran, which is undermining Israel, correct?
Correct, and the best thing we did in the supplemental is we reapplied those sanctions on energy and drones and rockets. Yeah.
And the Biden administration has let Iran access upwards of approximately $50 billion in revenue through this lack of sanction enforcement, correct?
Correct.
And the president then came into office. He restarted UNRWA, right? He took the affirmative step to restart UNRWA, which President Trump had stopped. We, Congress, had to step in and tell the administration in the appropriations package, stop funding UNRWA, something we'd been calling for. I introduced legislation 3 years ago to defund UNRWA, and we fought for it. We got that put in place. Why? Because finally they woke up on October 7th and said, oh, I guess some of these UNRWA folks are, in fact, saddling up and in bed with the terrorists. Correct?
That's all correct.
I appreciate what we're trying to do here. Obviously, there's some limits in what we can get out of the Senate, getting the president to sign a bill that would undermine his own authority, but the power of the purse is important. I'll close by just saying I wish we had used the power of the purse before we fully gave it up in order to stop the administration from doing this, but we are where we are, so we can try to use this. With that, I yield back.